I had heard a knock on the door, but when I opened it, no one was there. I looked around. Nothing. Then I looked down and saw it. Lying there on the doorstep was an old cell phone with a cracked screen. I picked it up and clicked the home button. It opened without a passcode, revealing a home screen with only one app. "Rebecca," I called out to my 18-year-old daughter as I stepped back inside and closed the door behind me. "You know anything about the cell phone I just found on the doorstep?" "On the doorstep," she called back from the living room, likely scrolling away on her own phone. "Yeah, with a big crack in it." "Nope. I guess I'll just throw it out then." "Wait. I want to see." She cried out, her curiosity piqued as she made her way over to the kitchen. I held it up for her to see. Looks old, like from when you and Mom were growing up." "When your mom and I were growing up, there were no cell phones, Becca." "Sounds boring." "Yeah, it was. Perfectly boring. In the best way possible. Now look at what's become of the world." Yeah, let me see it," she said, snatching the old cracked cell phone out my hand. "What's the passcode?" "There isn't one." She opened it. "Just one app. This phone is so mid." "Mid?" I asked, unfamiliar with her Gen Z slang. "It means like mediocre, Dad. Where'd you find this thing anyway?" "I told you, on the doorstep. Someone knocked and ran away." "So it's some sort of prank?" "If it is, it's a pretty mid-prank," I replied, giving her the same smug look I always did when I landed a dad joke. Your jokes are not funny, Dad. Anyways, I'm gonna see what's in the app," Rebecca said, as she scurried off back to the living room and proceeded to scroll away on the cracked old phone. "Cool. Let me know what you find, Becca," I said casually, as I sat back down at the dinner table and continued reading my newspaper. An hour or so later, my wife Erica returned home from work, and we had dinner. "Rebecca, it's dinner time," Erica called out from the kitchen. But my daughter didn't reply. "Becca," I added. But again, Rebecca ignored us. My wife and I both looked at each other and rolled our eyes. "Your loss. Food'll be cold again," Erica said, referring to the countless other times our social media-obsessed teen had forgone dinner so long that the meal had become cold. "Kids," I muttered under my breath. "So how was work, honey?" A few hours later, my wife and I decided to go upstairs for the night, and, seeing that Rebecca was still scrolling away on the couch, reminded her that her dinner was on the table. Once again, our daughter just ignored us as she continued to scroll away on her phone. Something that, after raising an 18-year-old daughter, I was very used to. But this time, something was different. This time she was scrolling on a different phone. The old cracked phone I had found on the doorstep, to be precise. She's still using that old thing. Wonder what app was on there. Must be some game or social media thing, I thought to myself. "Just remember to turn the lights out before you go to bed, Becca," my wife called down before we retired to our bedroom, to no reply. But the next morning, not only did we find the lights on, but we also found Rebecca still sitting there. Sure enough, scrolling away on the old cracked phone. "Rebecca," my wife called out. "Did you even sleep last night?" "Yeah, Becca, you really shouldn't be pulling all-nighters like that," I added, as I went to the kitchen to put on a pot of coffee. But before I could make it that far, something caught my eye on the kitchen table. To my disbelief, there was Rebecca's dinner, still sitting there, completely untouched. That's when I knew that something was very wrong. By the time my wife and I were able to pry the old cracked cell phone out of our daughter's hands, Rebecca had gone into a sudden fit of rage. "Give it back!" she screamed, her eyes cold and lifeless. I tossed the phone to Erica behind me while I stood between her and our daughter. "I said give it back!" Rebecca screamed again, in a threatening fashion. "Becca, what's gotten into you?" It's just an old phone, and a cracked one at that, I began. But before I could continue, my innocent daughter, who had never laid a finger on a soul her entire life, suddenly lunged at me, swung her arm, and ran her nails across my face, tearing the flesh from my skin and causing blood to pour down my neck. "Rebecca!" I yelled, raising my voice. But it was too late. She had already hopped over me and chased my wife into the kitchen. When I finally caught up to her at the entrance to the kitchen, I saw my daughter standing there with a steak knife on one side of the kitchen table, while my wife stood on the other, shaking in fear as she held the old cracked phone in her hand. "What was on that app?" I asked hypothetically out loud, realizing that whatever my daughter had discovered on the phone must have been the cause of her 14-hour doom scroll and subsequent fit of rage. But Erica must have taken me literally, immediately opening the phone and going to the app. I saw a perplexed look wash over my wife's face as she took her finger, placed it on the phone's cracked surface, and started to scroll. "No! Erica, stop!" I cried out as I ran over to her and ripped the phone from her hand. But before I could even process what had happened, I heard the steak knife that my daughter was holding fall to the kitchen floor before she too collapsed to the ground. "Becca?" I asked, confused by her sudden change of disposition, but at the same time, relieved that her fit of rage had ceased. That's when I heard a growl behind me, as my daughter's rage had somehow shifted to my wife, and Erica picked up the knife from the floor. "Give it back!" my wife screamed, her eyes now cold and lifeless. I looked down at my daughter, who looked as if she had just awoken from a trance. That's when I realized that whatever curse had been bestowed upon the old cracked phone's app seemed to only affect the last person who used it. I took my dazed daughter by the hand and led her out of the kitchen, out of the house, and to the driveway, as my wife followed, still wielding the knife. "Get in," I insisted as I opened my car door, and Rebecca hopped inside before I used my key fob to lock her inside. "Give me the phone," my wife cried from behind me as she swung the knife at me. I stepped aside and watched its blade pierce the hood of my car. I thought to call out my wife's name in an attempt to snap her out of it, but immediately realizing that there was only one way to snap her out of her trance. As she struggled to pull the blade out of the car, I seized the opportunity to run back in the house and turn on the sink in the first-floor bathroom. Eventually, my wife came back inside looking for me, and, sure enough, headed for the source of the running water. And when she stepped inside, I hopped out from behind the kitchen island, slamming the door behind her, before dragging a nearby bookshelf against the door and reinforcing it with a few other heavy objects. "Give me the phone!" I heard her cry out from inside the bathroom as I looked at the old cracked cell phone that I was still gripping in my hand and knew what I had to do. 30 minutes later, the deed was done. The old cracked cell phone, left on a random neighbor's doorstep in the next town over, where I hoped no one would recognize me. When I got back to the car, my daughter was just sitting there in the passenger seat, still traumatized and speechless from what she had just gone through. We drove home in silence. And when we finally got back, we waited by the barricaded bathroom door as my wife continued to scream, and waited, until eventually she stopped. I slid the heavy objects and bookshelf aside and opened the bathroom door to find Erica just standing there, as if waking from a bad dream, the same exhausted expression on her face that I'd seen previously on my daughter. It had worked. My wife was no longer possessed by the vile device. Erica walked over and hugged me. I looked over at my daughter. She smiled. I smiled back. In that moment, two things became clear. One, someone else had been possessed by the phone prior to leaving it on my doorstep. Two, someone new was possessed by it now. But all that mattered to me in that moment was that my family was okay. I wish I could say that after the dust settled, my daughter swore off cell phones, social media, and apps altogether. But the truth is, it only took a day before she was back to doom scrolling on her own phone. Now every time she does, and her dinner gets cold, I can't help but fear that she's been possessed again. But then I realize she's just a teenager. I met Ashley at my mom's clinic. It was our parents that set us up. Otherwise, I don't know if she'd have dated a guy like me. Because my blood is O negative, universal donor. My mom forces me to make a donation every 12 weeks. I was sitting with the tube hooked into my arm when her childhood friend, Sharon, appeared. Sharon recently moved back to our town and heard her former bestie became a doctor. She introduced her daughter, Ashley, who had stunning big blue eyes. Her skin looked even paler than mine. As a gamer, I'm basically allergic to fresh air, and she was dressed all in black. When she said hi, I squirmed on the bed, already sweating buckets. Luckily, Mom covered for me. Don't mind Ryan, he's gonna be lightheaded for a while. As she removed the tube from my arm, Ashley threw a hand up over her mouth and spun away, repulsed. Her shoulder clipped a plastic container filled with cotton buds, which spilled their contents across the floor. "You can just leave those," Mom said, as Ashley scooped them up. "It's okay, I'm totally OCD." While I sipped orange juice, our moms yacked away. I couldn't keep my eyes to myself, and every time I glanced at Ashley, she looked even more bored than I did, but I was too nervous to get a conversation going. Fortunately, my mom insisted they come over for food sometime. Ahead of the dinner party, I did push-ups in my room. Then I sat beside Ashley, who picked around her stir-fry. "Don't mind her," Sharon said, slightly embarrassed. "Ashley's not crazy about broccoli, or carrots, or honey, or garlic, or, well, she's just a fusspot in general." Underneath the table, my foot tapped so fast, and by dessert I'd barely strung 5 words together. Meanwhile, Mom and Sharon drained 2 bottles of wine. Since Sharon could barely stand upright, Mom said, "Why don't you stay in our guest room? Ryan can walk Ashley home. It'll get him out of that crypt for once." A lot of crime happened in our town, including stabbings and kidnappings. It wouldn't be safe to go by herself. Sharon practically shoved us out the door. "Don't look so scared, Ryan. Ashley doesn't bite." Ashley quietly walked beside me, arms folded. By the time we'd turned onto her street, all we'd talked about was the weather and how lame and transparent our mom's attempts to set us up were. Approaching her front door, I asked whether she liked video games. Her face lit up. "I play a ton of Terraria, although at the minute I'm addicted to Risks of Rain 2. For the next 20 minutes, I wasn't nervous at all. I got so in my element, I was brave enough to say, maybe we could play together sometime. Sure. I ran straight home and bought every game she mentioned. It turned out online me was way smoother than actual me. Over Discord, I kept making Ashley laugh, which helped melt away the nerves. Then I started complimenting her. It was like climbing in a warm bath and gradually putting more and more hot water in so you adjust to the new temperature, except with flirting. One night over Terraria, I said, "How's this? If I beat you in a PvP, you've got to let me take you on a date." I heard her smile through the headset. "Sure." My hands wouldn't quit shaking. At first it looked like she might smoke me, but I pulled out a win at the last second. I took Ashley for walks around our city so she could get familiar with the area. Because of all the reports of robberies and break-ins, we never stayed out too late, but I also didn't want to run into my school bullies, most of whom knew about a hot emo chick with an absolute dumper who moved to town and were going feral trying to find her. I avoided taking her out during the day, otherwise there'd have been a higher chance of us running into my bullies, but Ashley didn't seem to mind. After a handful of dates, we got a McDonald's. Or at least, I did. Ashley wasn't hungry. She watched me eat the chicken nuggets on a table in the park next to the duck pond. Staring into those eyes, I swallowed a gulp and laced my fingers with hers across the table. She gave my hand a squeeze. Then, slowly, I leaned forward and went in for a kiss. Ashley must have liked it because we kissed a bunch of times. Finally, I eased back and said, "I like you." "I like you too," she said, smiling. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. I wanted to take a picture of us and send it to every kid at my school, along with a few of the teachers who always called me nerd. I got so caught up in all the kissing, I didn't realize how late it was. I told Ashley we should hurry home. We left the park and followed a road that cut through a little woodland. Ashley didn't understand why I'd become so anxious. Up ahead, I could see the light of a petrol station. I figured we'd go inside and order an Uber to take us home. But crossing the bay, a car with its license plate covered cut in front of us and skidded to a stop. Brakes screeching. 3 men stepped out, each wearing masks. Grabbing Ashley by the arm, I made a break for the station, but the men blocked our path. As I shielded her with my body, somebody punched me in the gut, which made me drop to my knees. Then 2 sets of powerful arms wrestled me into the trunk of the car. I thrashed around, spreading out so I wouldn't fit, until the barrel of a gun pressed against my forehead. "Get in, or we'll kill the fucking bitch." It was totally black in there. I could hear sounds of a struggle, followed by muffled voices from inside the cabin. The car started moving, taking corners so fast I got thrown from one side to the other. The air was warm and getting warmer by the second, and I remember thinking I'd run out of oxygen before our attackers got the chance to kill me. As they drove, I caught fragments of their conversation. "Take this next right. Do it in the forest. Nobody will see. They were gonna murder us." I pushed against the top of the trunk with my feet, but it refused to budge, and the car soon came to a stop. A door swung open, then male voices traveled around. The fact Ashley wasn't making a peep scared me worse than if she'd screamed, because at least then I'd have known she was alive and breathing. Suddenly the men yelled over the top of each other. Then a gunshot went off. While the screams rang out, I attacked the roof with kicks and blows. At one point my hand got sliced open by a piece of metal, but I didn't stop thrashing around until the world went quiet. "Ashley." Footsteps slowly approached the car. I held my breath. The trunk rotated up, and then the cold air of the night rushed into the compartment. All I could make out was Ashley, silhouetted against the moonlight. I jumped up, grabbed her close. "What the fuck's going on? Are you hurt?" Blood was spread around her mouth and dripping from her chin. Shaking her head, she pointed at the side of the car. We were in a barren lot beside an abandoned multi-story car park. Between us and a wall of trees, 4 figures lay amongst the weeds. I went in for a closer look. The figures were skinny and shrunken and withered like Egyptian mummies. I could make out cartilage and exposed bone. "Don't freak out," Ashley said, approaching me from behind. I fell over and scrambled away in reverse. "I know this is crazy, but you don't have to be afraid, okay? I'm not going to hurt you. I don't normally go so overboard, but they were gonna slit our throats. Plus, I was overdue for a feed." As she reached down to help me, I threw up my cut hand between us, still dripping with blood, and whimpered, "Don't kill me." Ashley doubled over and started dry heaving. Between retches, she said, "Ryan, trust me, that isn't gonna happen. O-negative tastes gross, like worse than diarrhea. No offense. But that's why you don't need to be afraid of me." Using the back of her sleeve, she wiped away most of the blood from around her mouth and then smiled at me, fangs bared. "Because you're totally not my type." My wife has insomnia and does chores when she can't sleep. It's been that way for so long that I've stopped noticing. Usually, I don't even wake up. But a few nights in a row, she started running the garbage disposal a lot, off and on through the night, sometimes for a minute or two. Of course, I couldn't sleep through that. So late one night, I went downstairs to check on her. She was in her PJs and bent over the sink, staring into the drain. She was leaning in so close that some of her hair had piled up in the bottom of the sink. "You lose something?" I asked. She gasped and snapped up when she heard me. "You scared me," she said. She did look jumpy, which made me uneasy too. I saw that she was holding something and asked her what it was. "Nothing. A slice of turkey," she said, guilty. She had balled it up into a gray-pink blob from squeezing it so hard. "That doesn't go in the garbage disposal," I said. I didn't know what else to say. "Right," she said. "Sorry, I'm half asleep." She dropped it into the trash under the sink. There was a pack of sliced turkey on the counter, already half eaten. Why did we have it? I was the one who ate lunch meat. But I hated turkey. I didn't remember telling her to pick up any. "Hungry?" she asked. She had seen where I was looking. "No," I said. My body had gone cold. Something felt seriously wrong here. She nonchalantly turned around and put the lunch meat back in the fridge. Then, with her back still facing me, she said, "Actually, I did lose something in the sink. A gemstone stone in my ring." She turned around and shrugged. "I'm an idiot. Sorry." "Which did you lose?" I asked, trying to sound nice. I had never talked to her while she was in one of her insomnia spells. It was more like she was sleepwalking. Or as if I were talking to a stranger, a woman who only looked like my wife and had wandered into my house. "A little one here," she said, pointing at her ring. "You wouldn't have noticed it. It's really small. You can barely even see where it's supposed to go." I doubted that I wouldn't have noticed it. I had bought her the ring, but the kitchen was too dark for me to see clearly. "You want me to fish it out for you?" I said. She smiled. "Sure," I said, going over to the sink. I felt a sudden panicked urge to run back upstairs, but I pushed that feeling down. I loved my wife. I trusted her, even when she was maybe half lying. I reached my hand inside the drain. It was damp and warmer in there than I had expected. The bumpy edge of the blade was almost hot. The metal must have heated up from the garbage disposal running for so long. "It's really small," she said. She came over to watch and leaned against the wall. The switch for the garbage disposal was next to her shoulder. I almost told her to be careful, but didn't. I didn't want to seem controlling. She smiled again at me. I poked around the sides of the garbage disposal container. Everything I touched soggy and soft, old scraps of food. The container felt like it was made of rubber. I had thought it would be metal or hard plastic, but the sides gave slightly when I pushed, and they were strangely warm. My wife was watching me intensely, her shoulder now on the edge of the light switch panel. My finger brushed something hard, and she moved her arm, the arm that was on the switch, and I ripped my hand out of the drain. "What?" she asked. "Did you cut yourself?" "I'm fine," I managed to say. My voice was shaking. Was she really going to flip the switch? "You are?" she asked. "Yes, I'm fine. I couldn't find anything. Sorry." "That's okay," she said, yawning. She went back up to bed. She moved slowly, oblivious to her surroundings. Maybe she was sleepwalking. I followed her upstairs and found her already asleep. I couldn't make myself get into bed with her. None of it had made any sense. Her running the disposal, the meat, her lie about the ring. So I snuck back downstairs. The sink looked the same as before. A few drops of water around the rim, a waxy smear of grease on the stainless steel. I put my hands on either side of the drain and stared into the black hole. There was nothing unusual about it, other than the vague threat of something sharp hiding out of sight in the dark. But then I heard a low, soft gurgling sound in the drain. I bent over and lowered my ear to the drain to listen better. Maybe it was water moving through the pipes. But this sounded more organic, like the gurgling sound a baby might make. And I realized that my ear felt warm. Warm air was wafting out of the drain every few seconds, as if the hole were breathing. I pulled away from the sink. Nothing came chasing after me. Just to see what would happen, I got out a slice of turkey and pushed it down into the drain with my finger. As soon as the meat had slipped past the drain flaps, the garbage disposal roared to life. The metallic grinding noise rattled through the house. I probably screamed, but I couldn't hear anything over the harsh, wet grating sound. Finally, it stopped. My heart pounding, I took all the turkey that was left and dropped it on the drain, then got a wooden spoon and pushed it down into the hole. The garbage disposal turned back on again, and I ripped the spoon out. The end was gnawed to splinters. I'm not sure how long I stood there, watching the drain and listening to the blade chew up the meat. A minute, maybe. Then the faucet was running too. My wife was there. She had come down without me noticing. The water gushed loudly into the drain and choked down the pipes. The garbage disposal soon stopped, and she turned off the water. The water helps the food go down, she explained. I was too stunned to move, and she grabbed me by the arms, talking so quickly I couldn't get a word in. It had started a few nights ago, when she had fed the drain some crumbs from the counter. Then she fed it more, and noticed that it liked meat. So she got more meat. Whatever it was, the thing down in the drain, whatever it was doing, growing, nesting, it was getting more active because of the food, and that meant it was getting hungrier, which meant more food. She apologized for putting so many groceries on the card, but it had been worth it. She had tamed the thing. That's why I knew you'd be safe earlier, she said. I'll show you. She got a bag of sugar out of the pantry, wet her hand under the faucet, and dunked it into the bag. She pulled her hand out, and it was completely covered in sugar. Then she stuck her hand down the drain. "Stop!" I screamed. She pulled her hand back out. It was perfectly fine and perfectly clean, not a speck of sugar left. "See?" she said. "He won't bite, and it feels good." She sugared up her hand again and stuck it back in the drain. "It kind of tickles, and it's so warm." I couldn't speak. "You want to try?" she asked. And she got my hand wet under the faucet too, and dunked it into the sugar. I let her. I was curious, honestly, more curious than afraid. And then my hand went into the drain. There was a loud, sickening crunch. I remember that. But I don't remember anything after, or even how the pain, the adrenaline and shock blocked everything out. I must have somehow tied a tourniquet on and called an ambulance. It's funny. I close my eyes and I can't even picture the stump. It's still wrapped up. Or the blood. There must have been lots of blood, but it's all cleaned up now, and I can't picture any of it. Nobody could find the hand anywhere. Nobody can find my wife either. She took the cash, the jewelry, the second car. All of it mine. The cops put out an alert for the car. I don't know. It's all so screwed up. Today, I had a plumber come by to check out the garbage disposal. He had never seen anything like it. The shredder and motor were never installed. It's basically an empty container sitting under the drain. "And you said it was working?" he asked, doubtful. "Yeah," I told him. "My wife used it for years.